Hi, folks. So, in preparation for y'all kind of reading and getting into I Tituba, today we are going to be going through some of the background on witch hunting and some context re the specifically Salem witch trials, right? And then next week we're going to talk more about the novel itself. So, historically, the majority of serious witchcraft trials, persecution, and burnings at the stake happened decades or even centuries before the Salem witch trials, which happened in 1692 and 1693. The European Witch Hunting Handbook was published in 1486. It was Henrik Kramer's Malleus Maleficarum, the full title of which is generally translated as The Hammer of Witches, which destroyeth witches, and their hearsay as with a two-edged sword. So, it's a very long and dense book. I'll put a translation up as one of your supplementary texts for this week. It can be especially helpful if you want to write about medieval and early modern witches or demons. And it's a book that's full of fear and full of hate for witches, hate for women, pretty much saying that the only remedy for witchcraft is death, and advising torture as the best method to get a confession of witchcraft. It was very popular after it was printed. And it continued to be influential and popular for a long time. It was reprinted until the 1660s, so it was in print for the better part of 150 years. And to be clear, though it was popular among some clergy and lawmakers for a long time, a lot of people thought that Kramer, his book, and the people who used it were nuts, even when it first came out. This wasn't considered a normal thing to obsess over women's sexual habits and personal activities and to talk about, the influence of demons on, daily life. This wasn't just, a product of its time kind of thing. People thought this was weird. People even protested the violence of the torture and the murder of accused witches for centuries. So this wasn't just, a product of the times kind of thing. So, the tradition that Malleus and other theological and practical works about witches from around that time followed that all witches have all of their power from demons or from the devil, rather than having some intrinsic power or some power or skill that they've learned, which that was another perspective that was kind of more popular in the early and high Middle Ages, that it was an intrinsic. The witch had the power to do witchcraft, rather than the witch requires some kind of deal or intercession with the devil or a demon to make things happen. So, the popularity of Malleus Maleficarum sort of solidified the connection of witches with demonic and devilish activity. We've talked a lot before in this class about the importance of who's attributed with magical power and authority. Linking witches' power to almost always male demons or the devil not only diminishes the individual power of the witch, it emphasizes that the power is illusory. According to the theological tradition at this time, only God can make real changes to reality. Therefore, shows of power by demons or by the devil are necessarily only illusions. So, weakens the power and kind of makes it lesser than God's power. Malleus also identifies women as being more susceptible to demonic temptations to witchcraft because of their supposed moral weakness, just because they're women. Also, a lot of the times these demonic exchanges witches were supposed to have with demons or the devil were either explicitly or implicitly sexual, and as we know, patriarchy loves interrogating and policing women's and others' sexual lives more so than those of men. So lots and lots and lots of witchcraft accusations involved sexual accusations, like sleeping with the devil or incest or homosexuality, all very, very sexy accusation time, right? In addition to accusations of other things, including flying through the air, killing babies, harming crops or livestock, and causing impotence. I cannot emphasize enough the sexual anxiety that is an undercurrent through this whole book. So, that's a little bit of the background on the notions of witchcraft and witch hunting that were predominantly influential at the time of the Salem witch trials. What about Salem itself? As I said, the Salem witch trials took place in colonial Massachusetts between February 1692 and May 1693. Nearly 200 people were accused, 20 people were executed, and more died in jail. 78% of these victims were women. That's a lot. So, though we think of America as being founded on religious freedom, Massachusetts and much of New England was settled by Christians whose faith differed from the Church of England, and who were seeking religious freedom to run a state and a society based on their own Puritan religious views. And hopefully you can see how that's different from setting out to build a state separate from the church, where all religions can be practiced freely. So, the Salem witch trials are basically taking place in a theocracy, where religious leaders also run the government. There's a lot of scholarship about what went down in Salem. There are a lot of debates about what caused the initial incidents that led to the mass hysteria of the witch trials, including, see articles sometimes about the possibility of hallucinogens that might have been present in the community's food or water, like bird-borne illnesses or sleep disorders. However, there's also a lot of evidence, more evidence, that a lot of the instigating factors were interpersonal. Personal rivalries, jealousy, spite, and fear of the unknown or the unusual. So in short, people have always been people. The girls who were originally afflicted by witchcraft and making the initial accusations were between the ages of 9 and 17. They had fits of shaking, screaming, and contortion, etc. And the first 3 people who were arrested on related charges of witchcraft with these incidents were Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne. Both of the Sarahs were outsiders in the Puritan community of Salem for one reason or another. Sarah Good had a reputation of promiscuity, and Sarah Osborne had just broken local custom by marrying her indentured servant. The trials and associated hysteria continued to grow for months after these initial arrests. Tituba, the star of our story, was the first person who was accused. She was Minister Samuel Parris's slave, and she was a different race than most of the citizens of Salem. Sources suggest that she could have been black or Native American. She really was married to a man named John Indian. He really did become an accuser in the trials after her arrest. We also know that she sailed from Barbados with Samuel Parris, and that she lived with his family for at least 10 years in Boston before they came to Salem. She did confess to witchcraft when she was on trial, but, as I mentioned, a lot of times, interrogation techniques for accused witches involve tortures, and confessions under torture can't ever really be considered reliable. She remained in jail after the trials ended, and she was sold to an unknown person for the cost of her jail fees. Because of the terrible record-keeping, among many other atrocities that slavery entailed, we know nothing about what happened to her after she was sold out of jail. We also know very little about her life before she became involved in the witch trials. So, I want y'all to remember, Conde's novel, I, Tituba, is a fictionalized account of how things could have been from Tituba's perspective. Conde does include excerpts from transcripts of the historical Tituba's testimony in the novel. However, aside from that, she pretty freely admits to taking creative license, and a lot of Tituba's story kind of has to be the product of speculation because of the many atrocities of slavery that erase enslaved people's identities. So I'm very much not an expert on Salem or on the American witch trials or on really anything American, but there are a ton of resources out there, and I'm gonna try to include some like briefly relevant or interesting ones for your supplementary readings. And then in the next video, I will be talking more about the novel itself. But I kind of just wanted to give y'all a quick little background here. There is a ton more online. I know that I have probably missed stuff, but there's a lot of information out there. So if this is something that like you're really into, there are a lot of sources for you to like really dive into if this is something that you want to research further. Alright guys, hope you're having a good week. Take care.